So hello and welcome to You Sew You. My name's Zoe and this is my channel all about the crafty bits and pieces I get up to. I knit, I sew, I spin on a drop spindle, I dabble in weaving from time to time, and anything else that takes my crafty fancy. But this week we are talking about Ladderback Jacquard, which is a particular technique. So grab a brew, put your feet up and let's get started. So welcome back to any returning viewers, and to any new viewers a very warm welcome to you. Now if you've been around this channel for a while, you'll know that a couple of years ago I released a free hat pattern, the Ladderback Jack hat, which was designed to teach the Ladderback Jacquard technique, and I did create some tutorials at the time. However, one of them, the sound is dreadful on it, so as promised I am redoing that video now. For those of you that aren't familiar with Ladderback Jacquard, it is a technique to manage longer floats in Colourwork. So it's an alternative to doing stranded colourwork, and it just catches your floats in a different way. So let's get this camera moved around and take a look at it. Okay, so Ladderback Jacquard, let me show you an example first of all of what it's like. This is my Ladderback Jack hat that I made a few years ago. It's a free pattern available on Ravelry and Lovecrafts. I did do some tutorials at the time that I made this, but some of the sound wasn't great, which is why I'm redoing this one. But this design was specifically done to teach Ladderback Jacquard. So the benefit of this particular technique over stranded colourwork is we've got these big gaps between the motifs here, so that's quite a long span to be carrying a float across the back. And Ladderback Jacquard actually deals with that by managing the floats behind the main fabric. So if I flip this open, I can show you the inside. So this is how the technique gets its name. You have these ladders forming inside the main fabric that are carrying the floats across the back, and it's actually a separate layer of fabric. You can actually pull it apart from the main fabric, and it's two separate pieces anchored at the top and the bottom. So that's what we're going to be achieving, and it means that you're not having to worry about those long floats in colourwork, and it also is a little bit more flexible than stranded colourwork in that it's got a bit more stretch to it. So if you're doing socks or something, it's quite a useful technique for that, as well as for being able to carry these long floats. So okay, so I've got this little swatch that I've cast on. It's just a couple of rows of ribbing and a couple of rows of stocking stitch. And I'm going to do some setup rows first of all for my Ladderback Jacquard. Basically going to knit 4 stitches and then add in an extra stitch. So as long as you've got an extra stitch added at relatively consistent intervals around the swatch, then this will be fine, it will work. So knit 4. My preferred method of adding a stitch for Ladderback Jacquard is to knit front and back. Just going to knit through the front of the stitch first and then through the back of the stitch, and I'll show you why I really like doing that method in a minute when I go on to the next row. So I'm going to do that all the way around. I'm just using a cheap circular needle there, so just excuse me while I wrangle the stitches a little bit. So knit 4 and then add a stitch in. Obviously these needles are making a little bit of noise as I knit with them. Hopefully that's not too annoying. It's a bit of a swishy noise, they're just pony needles. Okay, so knit front and back, knit 4. And knit through the front and then through the back before taking that stitch off the left hand needle. So I'm going to do that all the way around, and I'll come back to you to show you the next step in a moment. Okay, so I've gone all the way around and I've worked my knit front and back every 5th stitch, so I now have that extra stitch throughout. I like to carry my floats as stranded every 5 stitches, so it ties in nicely with that. So my next step is to do my second setup round. I like to do 2 setups for Ladderback Jacquard. I have seen a pattern too where they've only done the one, which is fine, but I like to do 2. And for this round I'm going to knit the first 5 stitches. So that's the first 4 that we knit originally, plus the knit front from that knit front and back. And you can see that there's a little bar across the bottom of the knit through the back portion of that stitch. So in that stitch, we're going to purl. And we're going to do that again all the way around. So we knit the 5. And then we purl into the stitch that's got the little bar across the back of it, or across the base of it. And again, we're going to do the same all the way around. Knitting 5. And it's that purl that's going to make the ladderback portion of the technique to sit behind the main fabric, particularly when you combine it with the finishing round that we'll get to in a bit. That's after we've done the colour work. Now, one thing that is worth considering when you're working ladderback jacquard is where your extra stitches are going to sit, where your ladders are going to be when it gets to the point where you're switching from the front needle to the back, working in the round. As you'll know, if you're used to working in the round, you can get some laddering when you magic loop sometimes, like in the main fabric, so you have to be careful with your tension at that point. And sometimes with stranded colour, I find it like it can get a bit sort of puckery around that join between from the one needle to the other. Now in ladderback jacquard, because you are controlling where those ladders sit, if you can get one of your ladders either just before or just after the switch over of the needles, that's going to really help you sort of manage that tension. So you see I've got my extra stitch as the last stitch before I change onto my other needles on this particular version. It's just going to help sort of manage that tension as you change from one needle to the next. So I'm just going to go across the other needle in the same way, and then I'll show you how we add in the colours and how we make the magic work. Okay, so now that we've got both of our setup rows done, we're going to add in some colour. I'm not following a particular chart, I'm just going to add it in fairly randomly, just to sort of show you how the technique works. So I'm just going to knit a stitch or 2 in my main colour, and then I'm going to add in the new colour. Obviously you would be following your chart from whatever pattern you're doing, and you knit up to the point where you've got that purl stitch. Then you're going to bring all the yarns to the front of the work, and you're going to take note of which colour is before the extra stitch, and with a different colour you're going to purl that stitch, take the yarns to the back again. Have to make sure that you are not using the same colour as the one stitched before the purl. To purl, you have to use a different colour, otherwise it just won't work. You won't get the ladders disappearing behind the fabric the way that you need them to for this particular technique. So I've added in a second colour, I've got to my purl, I'm going to bring all of my working yarns to the front and purl that stitch with a stitch that is not next, the colour that's not next to it. And we keep going all the way around. I'm going to work in the same way for the whole of my colourwork pattern. Sometimes you'll find that you're only using one colour between the extra stitches, sometimes there'll be multiple colours. Just depends on what your chart tells you to do. And by bringing the yarn to the front every time, you're making the working yarn sit between the main fabric and those ladders. And whatever your pattern is, just keep working those colours as the chart tells you to do, making sure that when you do your purl, it's in a colour that is not next to the purl stitch. But it doesn't matter other than that which colour you use. And you can actually carry the yarn in this way as long as you like. Okay, so I'm going to keep working a few rounds like this, and then I'll come back to you a little bit later on to show you where I've got to and to show you how we finish off. Okay, so for the purposes of this video, I've just done 3 rows of improvisational colour work. So on this side, on the back side, I've just carried the floats the whole way across just to show you how far they can go. Whereas on this side, I've been a little bit more expressive with it. So we just need to finish off the Ladderback Jacquard now. So on the back you can see the ladders are formed, they're anchored at the bottom, we need to anchor them at the top as well. So we're going to do this using decreases. Now if you are knitting 2 together, the stitch on the left hand side, assuming you're knitting right handed, the stitch on the left hand side will come in front of the stitch on the right hand side for a knit 2 together, and for an SSK it'll be the other way around. So we're going to knit across in our main colour. In fact, we can cut our contrast colours, so we'll do that now and get those out of the way. That's the teal out the way and the green out the way. And we're just back to this butterscotchy. As you can see, I am wearing the cardigan that I used this yarn for originally. But, we're going to knit all the way across to that extra stitch. Just in that main colour, knitting as normal. And here we're at that extra stitch. We can see it's there because it's not attached to a column on the front. So we're going to knit 2 together to push that stitch behind, and it disappears. And we're going to do the same all the way across, except for the last one on this needle, because obviously it is the last stitch before the needle. Obviously if you've put your extra stitch in and then knitted 1 stitch afterwards, you can just knit 2 together the whole way across, but because I did it as the extra stitch being the last stitch on the needle, I'm going to change my approach. Knit 2 together, that one disappears behind the back, and just like magic you can't see the contrast colours being carried across behind the back of the fabric, assuming you've got a good density of stitch which comes from your gauge. And obviously if you had a loose gauge, there's going to be a little bit of visibility coming through, but if you've got a tight enough gauge for colourwork you're going to, they will just disappear behind. So a couple more, and then I'll show you how I'm going to deal with this one at the end of the needle. So that knit 2 together is just pulling the left hand stitch in front of the right hand stitch and pushing the right hand stitch to the back of the work. Okay, so now we've got the last few stitches here, and there's that extra stitch. This green one at the end is that extra stitch, but because I don't have a stitch on the left of it, I can knit 2 together if I take it around onto the back needle and borrow a stitch from there, but that then changes your beginning of round when you get to the end of the other needle. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to knit until I've got 1 left before it, and I'm going to SSK, so slip, slip, knit, and that will do the same thing of pushing that extra stitch behind the back. And we'll do the same across the back. And here you can see how much of things disappear as you're working. It's the only times you see the contrast colours are where it is that extra stitch. The rest of the time it's just the main colour the whole way through. Oh, sorry about the clanking needle there. I've got a glass board behind as a backdrop for what I'm doing. So obviously when the needles drop onto it, it does clang a little bit. So it's the same across the back here. And once you've finished off all your Ladderback Jacquard, you just complete your project as per your pattern. So I'm just going to do it all the way across the back here, and I'll show you that final stitch again, just like I did on the front. And else to say, you can still do knit 2 togethers if you want to. It just takes a little bit of rearranging of the stitches, those when it's the ones on the end of a needle. But that's not a problem. I mean, when I did the hat, that's the instructions that I give. Excuse the notification there. You see in the hat pattern, the instructions that I give, you are doing it 2 together the whole way across. But yeah, it just means shuffling stitches around. You might prefer to do it this way instead of having to cross over one round to the next to just get rid of that one stitch. It's personal preference, really, and whatever works for you. So they are all disappearing. And here we are at our last one. So we're going to knit 3 stitches. So we've got 1 main colour or front fabric stitch and the extra stitch there, and we're just going to SK. Obviously there is a little bit of a tension issue here because I've cut the yarn. All I need to do is just pull on that tail and it'll tighten up a little bit. And there on the back you can see none of the contrast colours showing through, and on the front just got your little improvised, in this case, Colourwork, but obviously you'll be using a pattern most likely on the front, and yeah, you just carry on as per your pattern to finish off. So I hope you found that useful and interesting. If you did, give me a like down below and let me know in the comments if you'll be doing any Ladderback Jacquard in the near future. Is it a technique you've come across before? If it's something that you've wanted to try? I will leave links down below to the free pattern where it is genuinely available. If you ever see the Ladderback Jack hat for purchase with a price on it, don't buy it. It is a free pattern. It will always be free on Ravelry and Lovecrafts, and if I ever get myself a website set up, I'll put it for free on there. I'm never going to be charging for it because the purpose of it is to teach you the technique so that you can apply it to other patterns that you do purchase. But I am aware that it has popped up on one website where they expect you to pay for it. So the links to that will be down below, along with all my where to find me on my socials and my Ko-fi account if you feel like buying me a coffee, but no obligation there obviously. And I aim to put a video up every weekend, once a month. It's a roundup of things I've been working on in the previous month, and in between times it's videos a bit more like this, so maybe a technique, maybe a project from start to finish, could even be me just waffling at the camera. But there they go every weekend, usually on a Saturday. Now whilst you're waiting for that to come up, I do have a whole host of videos up and ready for you to peruse in your own leisure. If you like tutorials, then this one, whichever side it's appearing on, might be good for you. If you want to see what I've been making last month, then my roundup of February's makes is also on screen somewhere around here. So enjoy those, and I will see you next time. But until then, happy crafting and bye bye for now.